The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar. My name is Dave Nichols and I work here at Break. Thank you for attending our webinar called Enabling and Encouraging Safe and Sustainable Travel. We've got quite a busy schedule, so we will soon crack on with today's webinar. So today's webinar is coordinated with the support for the Department for Transport, which means that we have a series of webinars that are free for you all to attend today. All of you are, as the webinar software hopefully lets you know, are in listen-only mode, which means that you are muted and can't contribute to the webinar at the moment. But if you do have a question and would like to contribute at all, there are two options for you. Firstly, there's a question panel on your right-hand drop-down panel. If you have a question at all during any of the presentations, then please feel free to type your question into that box and we'll put the questions to the speakers and hopefully they'll be able to answer your questions. Alternatively, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, then there's a raise hand icon on the top right hand of your screen. You can click that once we get to the question and answer section, and I can unmute you and you can ask your question verbally. So there's two options for you. We will take questions for each of the presenters at the end of each presentation. So if you have any questions, like I say, do feel free to put them to us during the presentation or hold off to the end as they might cover those questions for you. As I mentioned, this is a series of webinars that we are running over the next few months with support for the Department for Transport. So here's our running order for today. So I'll hand over shortly to my colleague Gary Ray, who's Campaigns Manager here at Break. And then we'll be hearing from Matt Davis at Sustrans Scotland, who will be talking about creating an active travel strategy. Then we'll hear from Mark Tune from Warrington Council, who'll be talking about reducing speeds to create a safer environment for walking and cycling, and the work that they've done in Warrington to lower speed limits in residential areas. And then finally we'll hear from Ginny Leonard from City Connect, talking about creating safe walking and cycling paths. So, as I mentioned, we have a series of other webinars, which I will mention at the end of this, and we'll email you afterwards. So here's some notes for your diaries, and hopefully you'll be able to attend some of our future events as well, all on similar topics, but just looking at different ways that you can get involved and promote this important topic within yourself if you work for a local authority, but also working with other organisations and how important it is that we all work together to try and encourage and enable more sustainable and safe travel spaces for all of us in all our different communities. So as I mentioned, first of all, I will hand over to our campaigns manager here at Break, Gary Ray, who will talk you through a little bit about our work here at Break and the work that we can do to create a safe and sustainable future.
Thank you, Dave, and echoing Dave's comments this morning, a warm welcome, warm being the operative word, I think, to you all on this seminar. I want to spend just a few moments talking about why we do what we do, and this is Break's vision, and it's something that we've been working hard on for many years now. In fact, Break now in its 20th year. So why do we do what we do? Quickly, what do we believe in? What actions we think need to be taken to change behaviour and indeed introduce or at least change laws. That is really why we were established. So we do believe that no one should lose their life or suffer injuries for trying simply to get from A to B. Travel should always be about zero harm. And so we believe children and adults should have that freedom really to move around and experience and enjoy the environment that surrounds them. They want to be able to get from A to B without fear, without threat, without risk to health, or indeed discomfort. So Brake's vision is simply this, a world where there are 0 road deaths and injuries, and people, as I say, can get around in ways that are safe, sustainable, healthy, and enjoyable. Safe, as I say, travel doesn't pose a threat to life, nor a threat of serious injury. That's the vision. Sustainable, because travel actually doesn't contribute to pollution and global warming. It ought not to. And healthy, because people can engage in active travel, and we'll hear more about that from our other contributors today. Getting around in ways that can actually contribute to health and well-being without breathing in damaging air pollution from traffic. And let's not be afraid to talk about that word, enjoyable. We need to be able to make this enjoyable. As I said, children and adults having the freedom to move around their communities. That is vital for the work we do. And why we do it, and I always talk about this figure. It's the first figure that I retained when I joined Brake, because every day 5 people are still losing their lives on UK roads, and a further 61 are seriously injured. Each loss, each injury devastating to those families. And the global context of this quickly, the situation is worsening. 1.2 million people, for example, dying annually on the world's roads, and that's a figure that's set to increase by 50% by 2030. So there is a real urgency to doing what we are doing at Brake and what our partners on this webinar are also doing. The impact on health, the environment and society is, in our view, becoming critical. Now, in terms of the reality, I mentioned that earlier. Currently, things are too unsafe. They're unsustainable, they're unhealthy, and they're certainly unenjoyable. Just this past week, we've had UK figures out which show for the first time in 17 years a rise in the number of casualties on our roads. Road deaths up 4%, and as I think others will reference in this webinar, cyclist deaths up 8%, pedestrian deaths up 12%. The figures are going in the wrong direction, so there's a real urgency, a renewed urgency to our work here. And the context around this you can see on your screen there. A growing issue of people dying from respiratory conditions. Now these are directly attributable now to motorised road transport pollution from gases, and that's going to get worse, because the fact of the matter is, when I've been checking up some of the figures behind those that you can see on our screen, the number of vehicles is set to increase by 43% by 2035, and traffic delays by 50%. That's assuming nothing changes from today. That's certainly unsustainable in every sense of that word. So let's move on and let's talk a little bit more about Brake's work and why we do what we do. Well, with our partners, we're at the forefront of some significant campaigns, particularly one of the practical ways we think people can change behaviour, and we can change the laws, and therefore achieve some of those points that I referenced earlier, is to reduce our urban speed limits to 20 miles an hour. The urban default speed limit, of course, you will know, currently set at 30 miles an hour. And we and our partners, particularly in the Go20 coalition, building other measures, campaigning with governments, and that's governments plural, of course, because we need to increase our efforts with the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly and the Northern Ireland Assembly as well. It's not just about Westminster these days. So we're campaigning hard to introduce 20-mile-an-hour limits. Certainly a reduction in the drink-drive limit. That battle is not yet won. We think we need to bring that down to zero tolerance in terms of people taking alcohol. And of course, we've been campaigning recently about the lower drink drive limit in Scotland, and we think that is a useful step towards zero tolerance and something which England needs to follow suit in. Now, we also take much time educating and advising people about using roads safely and sustainably, as I referenced earlier, particularly by driving more safely and by indeed driving less, and more of that in a moment. This is about the behaviour change that I mentioned, and perhaps this webinar will help give you some ideas about how practically we can implement some of those nice words that I've just talked about. Words are not enough, of course. We need to take action locally and as well as nationally. So we do engage companies and communities and schools. We coordinate the leading UK Road Safety Week, established now for 18 or so years. Something I will mention a little bit about our theme, which suits what we're talking about this morning very well indeed. And we're really keen to get all of you involved on this webinar and others so that you can run your own safety initiatives, but more of that soon. So just moving on in terms of some of that reality that I talked about earlier. The figures there on your screen speak for themselves. I won't read them out, but there's some positives here as well. For example, on average, we've discovered that a family can save over £600, nearly 650 quid actually, a year if they swapped a car-based school run for walking or cycling. So there is some economic benefits here as well as the health benefits. And that's really important, and that's one of the messages we'll be talking about during Road Safety Week. But worryingly, average walking trips per person have decreased, and maybe we're not surprised by this, by 27% since 1995. We're just not getting off our backsides and walking enough. That is the blunt truth there, and that is something that I think all of our presenters on the webinar today will be seeking to encourage. We've all read and seen in the media the growing obesity crisis, and we think that is now becoming critical. When we've spoke to our colleagues in NHS England in particular, they have referenced that as being one of the critical touchstones of how they can deliver an effective service. So I think it's not just the responsibility of health professionals to help reduce those figures and those costs, both economic and health costs, but organisations like ourselves and others on this webinar to do their bit as well. So perhaps some grim reality there, but here at Break we're nothing if not realistic about the challenges that certainly we're confronted with. Now, if I may, I'd like to talk a little bit about Road Safety Week and our theme for this week. You'll see there, back end of November, we like to choose a cold month, keep us on our toes, 23rd to 29th of November. The theme this year is Drive Less, Live More. And it seems to be almost the only choice that we could make this year, given what I've just spoken about. And it's an area in which Break has been developing and I guess expanding its remit into health and sustainability issues. Essentially, this is about the health of the individual, and it's also about the health of the planet that we all live on. So how can we reduce our reliance, particularly on private vehicles, often used just for journeys of less than 2 miles. I mean, there was a time, I'm old enough to remember, when we could run and skip and walk happily to school. I know I used to walk 4 miles every day to school. I sound like an old man now. That simply doesn't seem to happen now. The school run seems to dominate first thing in the morning and last thing at night. That's something we want to change. And we also want to talk about, within Road Safety Week itself, Go 20, which I mentioned. That campaign is one of our leading campaigns about how we can reduce the speed limit, and that is where local authorities can play a significant role here, because they do have that power and authority to reduce speed limits in urban areas, well, essentially in areas where we live, work and play, to 20 miles an hour. That's vital for us, and we'll be talking about that more during the week. Now, Road Safety Week is not actually about break. It's about local community groups and schools and police forces and the fire service and other volunteers doing their bit to promote safer roads. So we do encourage people to register, and people are registering now to take part in Road Safety Week. If that happens, then I can assure you get a free email action pack. But there are other ways that I would like to quickly mention, Dave, if I may, about promoting our theme, how you can get involved in it, particularly if you're an employer. We're really keen that employers set up a scheme encouraging active and sustainable commuting, to run a car-free day for staff, organise a sponsored run or bike ride, run an activity showing how many calories you can burn off walking and cycling, and maybe do some analysis at your at-work mileage to see if journeys can be reduced or better planned to improve efficiency. Another thing here, and I think it's important for our audience today, if you're a local authority, road safety practitioner, volunteer, community leader, again, we're really keen that you can run some car-free days for us. Sign up to having employers and schools to be involved and helping local schools and companies run any of those activities that I've just talked about. Or how about running a local survey to identify barriers to active and sustainable travel, something that we've certainly done in the past, and we think that works in terms of gaining media coverage. So just some of the ideas that you can have a think about there. As the screen suggests, there is more on our road safety website, www.roadsafetyweek.org.uk. Really important that in terms of why we're doing this theme, drive less, live more. The walking is down. Use of private vehicles on trips for less than 2 miles, it's up. A greater epidemic that I've referenced in terms of people's health. But also the economic cost here. Nearly half of households in England could be struggling with the cost of car ownership. Now, on an average, as I said, a family can save over £650 by swapping that car-based run. And perhaps one of the most starker figures that I've come across in preparing for Road Safety Week, and indeed for this morning's conversation, air pollution estimated to cause 24,000 deaths a year in the UK, with half attributable to road transport. I think that's a figure that we should all just pause and think about for the moment, and then think about practical ways in which we can actually take action. And Road Safety Week seems as good a way of doing that as possible, but it's something that we'll be running every day, every week throughout this year and beyond.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gary, for that. And hopefully, I know we've got many people attending this webinar who have worked with Brake for many years, and lots of you who may be getting in touch with Brake for the very first time. So hopefully that has given you a clear view of our work and how you can get involved. So if you have any questions, or if you want any more information about how you can get involved with Brake, and in particular with Road Safety Week this year, then do get in touch. I've got to mention earlier that all the presentations from today will be emailed out after today's webinar. So this afternoon I will send you all a link to our website, which will have all of the presentations plus a recording of this webinar. So all the information will be there for you to go back to and hopefully share with colleagues if there's some useful points that you can pick up on. But like I say, if you have any questions at all for Gary or myself and the work we do at Brake, then please do feel free to get in touch at any stage. So next I am going to pass over to Matt Davis from Sustrans Scotland, and there we go, and I will let Matt introduce himself, talking about creating an active travel strategy. Thanks very much, Matt.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave, and thanks very much for having me on this this webinar. It's the first webinar I've done, so it is a little bit unusual sitting here in front of a computer. I guess a lot of people are going to say that and speaking my spiel. So hopefully the lack of eye contact won't be an issue, and if you've got questions, as Dave says, then yes, we can take them all at the end. So I've been asked to talk about the work I'm doing in Scotland about creating active travel strategies. Just right at the start, I think it's maybe important to get rid of some jargon in terms of active travel and what it is and what it isn't. So defining active travel, I think we're mostly talking, we all know, we're mostly talking about walking and cycling primarily. But really it could be any method of using physical exertion to propel yourself. So for instance, scooting is becoming more popular with children and adults, that would be included. And even one of my former colleagues once did cross-country skiing to get to work and was very pleased with himself because he said that was sustainable travel when it was snowy along the path network. So really it's all kind of things, but really walking and cycling, illustrated by the cover picture. So I need to try. I don't know why it's there we go. Right, so here's an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Firstly, why develop a strategy, and this is just both why it's important, but also the policy background in Scotland as to why local authorities are starting to develop their own strategies more and more. Then I'm going to focus on 2 points that relate to the guidance that was circulated with the invitation. Firstly, the process of developing a strategy, that's really the how do we go about doing this? And the second bit, recommended content, is the second part of the guidance, and that's really the what to include. And I'll just finish with a brief case study of Edinburgh, how I feel their active travel strategy has helped them achieve more for walking and cycling. So to start off with a quote, this is a quote from Benjamin Franklin. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I think it's fairly self-evident what it means, but I think I'm generalizing to say that for a long time in active travel, this has kind of been a relevant quote, because getting more people, particularly cycling, doesn't seem to have been a high priority in the UK as a whole. A lot of the efforts that have been made in this way to encourage cycling and walking feel like they've been fairly ad hoc and unplanned. And I think this is the kind of thing that's starting to change now and needs to be really be mainstreamed across the UK to get more people walking and cycling. We need more strategic planning for it at every level, really. So this is a picture. I think we, especially when we talk about cycling, I think we talk about Copenhagen far too much. But I think it makes an important point here. This is a picture from Copenhagen that illustrates the fact that there's a lot of people, as you know, cycling in their city. But the reason this has happened is because they decided that it was a priority. It was important for their city to have lots of people cycling. They realized there were a lot of benefits to the city in doing this. So what they did over many years, they planned what they need to do or steps they might need to take to make that happen. And then they started carrying out those steps. And they kept doing it, and they're still doing it today. And the result is that, as you see, a lot of people are cycling in Copenhagen because they had a plan to achieve that and clear actions, and they started to work their way through them. So this is the kind of thing that could be done anywhere. It's not specific to Copenhagen or Europe or anywhere else. It's the kind of thing that we're starting to do more of in Scotland, and I believe in other parts of the UK as well. So moving on to the why have people started to develop strategies in Scotland, well, we have to look a bit at the policy background, which may not be familiar to the audience. So I could talk about a range of documents, but really I want to start with the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland, which was released in 2010. And this is a Scottish Government document. The headline really from it is a vision of 10% of journeys to be made by bike by 2020. That's quite a strong statement being made by government that cycling is important. Now, following on from this, there were a number of actions within the plan that related to behaviour change, training, infrastructure, and so on. And this was really one of the first things that I feel started to raise cycling much further up the agenda, having a national government document come out and say these things. Another thing that's been quite influential on local authorities is a document that Cycling Scotland have produced. This is the 2013 iteration. It's basically a review specifically of cycling policy in all the councils all the 32 councils in Scotland. And that, I feel, having spoken to quite a lot of local authorities, has been influential in a number of cases. If we have a look inside, the pages here, in the top right, you'll see there's a star rating. Now, every single council was given a star rating out of 5 as to how Cycling Scotland felt they were getting on with policies and actions to support cycling. And these star ratings seem to really hit the mark in some ways, particularly this example from Dundee. Having spoken to them, I remember them saying, you know, our star rating is a lot lower than other places. What can we do to improve that? But it wasn't an overly negative message. Every local authority had what it called a good news story there, something they were doing well. And there was other, then on the right-hand side in grey, there were some suggestions for things that councils could do to help improve provision for cycling and planning for cycling. And one of the common ones for many local authorities was a suggestion to set up forums to discuss cycling planning and also to develop their own cycling strategy and associated actions. So this is something that started to sink in, I think, with local authorities when they started to be compared in this way. I have to say, none of the authorities have got 5 stars yet, although one authority did get 1 star. So following on from the national assessment there, around about the same time, in 2013, there was a review of the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland to see how it had been going over the first 3 years. And a couple of important things seemed to come out in the responses that people made to that. The first thing was that while recognising that recreational and sports cycling is important, there was general support that CAP should have a strong focus on functional cycling. That's everyday journeys, going to the shops, going to work, etc. And the second thing that I pulled out as important is that there was a strong emphasis on the need for local cycling strategies and plans at local authority level. Indeed, the document says that although a number of authorities have done a number of things basically for moving forward cycling, the majority of local authorities have neither a strategy in place nor a policy covering, for instance, a strategic cycle route network in their area. So following on from these findings, there was a new action put in the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland, and it's been highlighted right at the start of the guidance that I circulated. And this is an action that all local authorities should have an active travel strategy by 2015 to support both infrastructure development and behaviour change work. Now, this again made an even stronger statement, I think, about the importance of planning and having a strategic approach to developing cycling in all of the 32 local authorities across the country. There was another thing in CAPS that was that the government would provide some support to all the local authorities, because I think just giving them this thing to do without that, it's much better to give them a bit of advice and support. And as a result, my role was created to liaise with all 32 of them and provide them with advice and support on how they might go about planning and developing strategies for cycling and walking. You'll notice a lot of the stuff I've talked about here has been about cycling, and I think this will be a theme of the talk, that there has been a stronger emphasis on cycling, I feel, than walking more recently, although we do just recently in Scotland have the new National Walking Strategy approved. But I feel like we do have relatively high levels of walking in Scotland and in the UK compared to cycling especially. And I do feel like more needs to be done to improve conditions whereby more people feel they're enabled to cycle than it does. I think we really need to do some tweaks to make walking more amenable, but I think we need to make some quite big steps taken to get cycling up the agenda. So that's why I think there has been this stronger emphasis on cycling. So following on from starting in my role, I think we decided that we needed to have some kind of framework or really put some meat on the bones of action to it about developing strategies. So I, along with a number of partners, formed an advisory panel, and together we, these were partners who were involved in the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland, third sector and local authorities. We got together and brainstormed about what kind of guidance we would provide. I think we really want it to be as short, succinct, and simple as possible, but still have all the key points in. Make some clear recommendations about what kind of things we were looking for to be included. So, in general, the first point there, day-to-day journeys. This was a clear focus of the cycling action plan, was that we should focus on the day-to-day journeys that people make primarily. So that should be a clear focus of local authority strategies. And then right at the start, I put a page of summaries there about just all the benefits, and there are multiple benefits from people cycling and walking more. I've listed them here. There's many more beyond this, I think. For instance, the talk before, road safety is really quite an important issue that relates to cycling and walking as well. I feel like having the strategies develop, more separated facilities for cycling and walking will help get people doing those activities more, as will, of course, reducing the amount of motorised traffic volumes that there are around. So yeah, we didn't want to go over the top on what the benefits are, and we don't want council strategies to have pages and pages of the benefits, but I think it is important that they highlight that there are a lot of things that getting people cycling and walking more can do to help, outside of just transport issues. So the next part of the guidance really looks to suggest an overview of a process for developing a strategy. And although we're talking about an active travel strategy here, this really is a general process that could be applied to developing any strategy, really. So there's a flowchart really that shows suggested steps to be taken. And the first one really is looking at what the conditions are like in your local area. What are the issues? What are the problems? What are the opportunities for getting people cycling and walking more? And in what way can we really sell this to local officials and politicians, the value of it? And that comes back to the things from the last slide. So once issues have been brainstormed and identified, then it's really a case of coming up with how we'd really like it to be instead. And we really need some clear objectives. So it might be, as Edinburgh has done, they set a target, they want a certain proportion of their journeys to be by bicycle. I think it's 15% of journeys to work, and they've set that as an aspiration. But the objectives could be, we want to have more children trained cycling in school, we want to make the urban environment easier to walk around. Whatever the objectives are, they need to be set locally, and they need to be appropriate to the local area of which they're in part. So I suppose that's another thing in this guidance. It's fairly generic because there was a recognition that, especially in Scotland, but everywhere really, urban and rural areas are very different, and even beyond that, all the local authorities have very different characteristics. So while there's some broad things we want to suggest, we want to be too specific. We want them to come up with the appropriate measures themselves for their area. So once we've decided what objectives we want, then it's important that we have really clear actions. And I think this is the key difference from some of the strategies that have been produced in the past, particularly to do with walking and cycling. They've often talked about it being generally a good thing to get people more walking and cycling. It'll be encouraged and it'll be supported. But often there haven't been specific actions that will really back that up, things that can be tangibly completed and that you're starting to make progress. So I think the clear actions is a central point of the process. And following on from that, you start to implement the actions, but you need to be able to have in place some kind of framework to know if you've been successful or not. Because as with any investment, you need to be able to demonstrate that it's going well, or alternatively, if it's not going well, what might need to be changed to make things improve. A few little bullets there at the bottom there about the general feel of the strategies we were going for. I think all the partners wanted to be a collaborative process. Although these strategies are often led by transport departments and councils, we want all partners to be involved. All other departments, planning, education, sport, and then outside of that, the NHS, universities, and so on. Just everyone needs to have a say that has a stake in this, and really everyone does. So the more partners that are involved, really the better. I think the final document needs to be really concise. That's what we're going for. We tried to make the guidance as concise as possible. And as I say, we don't really need 50, 70, 80 pages. It'd be much better to have a clear set of concise actions and objectives, and then see how you go from there. And yeah, I've talked about actions as well. So the only other thing to say about the process really is, although in the guidance I put it down as this linear process, on reflection I think it's probably more apt to think of it as a cycle, in whereby once you go through the process, you develop, you implement, after a few years you start to monitor how things are going, and then there'll be a review stage, and therefore you can tick off the actions you've done, modify the process, and really reform your actions for the next few years, because I think it has to be an iterative process where we learn as we go, really. So that's the process. Now I'd like to move on to kind of the more of the content of the guidance, really. So we suggested 4 essential elements. Now 2 of them relate to the process, and I've really talked about them already. We want them to be action-led. We want a clear plan of actions that can be tangibly assigned to particular partners and particular people, and want them to be smart as possible. By smart, I mean the acronym specific, measurable, and so on. And as I said, monitoring is very important towards the end of the process. Now, beyond these process elements, we did recommend specific content to do with the actual kinds of actions we want to see. And it's very clear that just simply building infrastructure is not enough on its own. So the main focus of the content is really a mixture of infrastructure and behavior change, training and promotion measures. But looking at the infrastructure first, I think I've touched on before that I feel that more needs to be done to encourage cycling than has to be done to encourage walking. And the reason is, I feel like certainly in our urban areas we have existing walking networks that, although not perfect, are pretty good, and you can be fairly confident that if you want to walk somewhere, most of the places you want to walk, you will be able to do so, and you'll be able to do it without having to mix too much in traffic. Essentially, we have the pavement network, we have a segregated walking network that's commonplace. We don't have something similar for cycling infrastructure, certainly not in any of the major cities in the UK or any of the other settlements that I know of. We have bits of infrastructure that don't yet connect to form coherent networks. So I think that was the first real essential item to be recommended, was, as this schematic plan shows, is to plan out a cycle network for the urban areas particularly, where there are most potential for getting people cycling and walking. And then begin to prioritize and implement sections of that. Most places have some good infrastructure that they can build on and use as a starting point to make a network. But it's really thinking about where are the main places people want to go, where are the major centres of population, and starting to come up with a process to join those up. And in urban areas, it's acknowledged that a lot of the journeys, quite a high proportion, are short enough to cycle and walk. So it's really planning around the sub 5 kilometre journeys in your network. With respect to the walking infrastructure, that is put in as an essential element, but we've really said that we want to see improvements to the existing walking network and given some suggestions of the kind of things that would make a difference. I don't know if I specifically suggest this, but it's things like making crossings at signalised junctions work better, removing guardrail, decluttering, and so on. And if actually you look at the pictures of the infrastructure we've got here, we have got a mixture of urban and rural infrastructure. At the top there, we've got a curb-separated two-way cycle lane in Glasgow, and then we've got a path alongside a rural road through a village. Both are equally valuable and do the same thing, which is to separate cyclists from traffic. Not to say that that's always necessary, we've heard about 20-mile-an-hour speed limits already today. And in quiet residential areas that are traffic calmed, or where there's a limit of 20 put in without traffic calming, these can form key parts of the network too. So moving on to the other essential element that recommended, and that relates to behaviour change, training and promotion. Now, I think it's fair to say, and I think I've put this explicitly in the guidance, that the existence of good quality walking and cycling facilities won't automatically result in a growth in those modes of transport. There is a need to empower people with the skills, the knowledge and the confidence to make walking and cycling realistic and desirable options. So that's why things like cycle training in schools is very important, to teach children that as a life skill at an early age. Signing of networks is very important as well, because although many people are familiar with their area, first-time users, it's vital really that they feel like they can be taken along routes and networks to get where they need to go. And I think when it comes to the rest of the guidance, really, beyond these essential elements of infrastructure and training and promotion, we've really created a menu of options, really, that people can choose from. As I said, we didn't want to be too prescriptive. I think all that really matters is that there's clear infrastructure plans and that there are clear things that will be done on the behaviour change side. As to what they are, again, local priorities are probably what's important there. But to give you an idea of a few of the things we're suggesting, things like marketing and promotion campaigns, personal travel planning, working in schools and colleges, yes, 20-mile speed limits, reduced speed limits on rural roads, and then things that sometimes don't get picked up so well, like maintenance of infrastructure, bicycle loan schemes, and even moving on to using tourism and leisure and sport as a justification for investment. Because while it's important to have the functional journeys being made and enabled in urban areas, to make the case for putting paths and routes in rural areas, I think you really need to look to tourism and the economic benefits that safe, attractive routes bring, such as what we see with the expansion of the national cycle network, in terms of the extra employment and the extra income they bring to areas from both day trips and longer cycling and walking holidays. So I think, yes, there's a number of ways that we can justify investment, but really the primary focus has been on functional journeys and enabling people to get to school and work and so on. So finally, just briefly to talk about Edinburgh and what they've done. They put in what they called an active travel action plan in 2010, and I've taken a look at their 2-year review that they did 2012-13 time, and the kind of things that they've said to me and also in the report that how having the strategy has helped them. I think it has generally raised the profile of cycling walking in Edinburgh, especially cycling, and it has been a justification for increases in staffing and funding. You're probably aware of the commitment the council's made to back in the start of 2012 to commit 5% of the transport budget to cycling, rising by 1% each year. And I think that commitment's now being reinforced, that will continue until they get to 10% of their own transport budget. So in part, having the strategy is helped with that, but also they have more staff in the team dealing with cycling and walking than they used to have. Looking at the infrastructure, there's been incremental improvements in the cycling and walking network year on year, and in part thanks to that new budget. The change priorities thing is interesting because I talked about maintenance before. Having the strategy has really helped them review their own internal processes and look at the maintenance of paths. They've done things like winter gritting of paths, not all, but the highest priority, most central ones, and things like the cutting back of vegetation and resurfacing of sections. That has become more commonplace, as has the repainting of cycle lanes and so on. So I think there's a whole picture here that it's just gradually raised the profile of cycling and walking and why it's important. And I think, well, I would expect to see that as other authorities in Scotland do the same, similar things will start to happen. I'm already seeing inklings that funding commitments may be made in other places, but we'll just have to wait and see if that's borne out. So that's pretty much all I have to say, other than just to leave you with this. And I think that the main message from this really is to, if you're going to develop a strategy, is to keep it simple, especially at the start. Don't start with War and Peace and a million and one actions. And as I say, you can always, once you've got something in place, start to review it and expand on it as you go and as you gather support. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt, for that, and hopefully people might have got a chance to have a look at the guidance we sent around before, but we will circulate a link to that afterwards. And I think there's some very key points there. So as I mentioned before, if anybody does have any questions, then now's the time. If you can use the question panel on your on the webinar, please feel free to type a question in there, and I can put those to Matt. If you don't have any at the moment, but think of some later on, then do feel free to put those through break, and we can pass any questions or information that you require to Matt after this webinar. But I think that's a real in-depth kind of insight really into a travel strategy and how that can be implemented. Just a quick question, Matt, with regards to the situation in Scotland, and obviously you talked about those documents at the beginning and how that you know, the targets that have been set in future years to increase cycling and make places more friendly. I mean, how do you feel England and Wales and Northern Ireland are doing in comparison, really? And are there any similar documents or similar presentations being made to kind of push councils and push forward similar strategies in the rest of the UK?
Well, I notice on the delegate list there's a few people listening in from Wales, and they probably know more about this than me. But in Wales they have the Active Travel Act, which places as a statutory obligation that councils develop these kind of strategies. Now, it's an interesting comparison because the process is not statutory in Scotland, but it's heavily encouraged. You know, funding for active travel is increasing in Scotland, and authorities are aware of that. So it's a bit more carrot in Scotland, maybe a bit more stick in Wales. I don't actually know how it's going to play out. I think it'll be interesting to see as a comparison how the different approaches work. In England, I'm aware that you now have the section in the Infrastructure Act to do with cycling, and there's also a new minister for cycling in England. Now, I've only seen those come out in the last week, so I think it's probably too early to say what kind of an impact that's going to have. But prior to that even, there was this Cycle City Ambition Fund, and I believe one of the speakers later is going to talk about some of the investment that's come off the back of that. So yes, I think in England it's too early to say what's going to happen, but it seems like there are interesting things starting to happen. And in Northern Ireland, I'm not so sure the situation there. One thing I do know is we have talked to them about through Sustrans about, you know, the processes in Scotland and how they might do something there. Interestingly, their local roads are all controlled by central government, which is quite unusual for the UK. So councils don't have quite as much control over even very, very small local roads in terms of putting in cycling infrastructure. So that's an interesting difference, but I don't know in terms of encouragement how that's going precisely at the moment.
Yeah, no, sorry, my colleague Gary had said apparently kind of last week the government has agreed to implement a walking and cycling strategy in England. So I know Robert Goodwill is, I think as you mentioned there, is the cycling and walking minister, so that's someone that we'll be kind of working closely with, and I know Sustrans are as well. So no, thank you sorry, thank you very much for your time there, Matt. Really appreciate your time. And as I say, if you have any questions in the future, then do let us know. Sustrans, we really appreciate kind of all the work they do, and Break tries to work as closely as possible with the great work that they're doing and achieving all across the UK. So I will now pass you over to Mark Tune from Warrington Council. As I mentioned, was mentioned there by Matt, he did touch on 20-mile-an-hour limits and how actually reducing speed limits can help and play a part. So it kind of leads nicely on to hopefully Mark's presentation and the efforts that they had to go to and what they've achieved in Warrington. So thank you very much. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, David. Morning all, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I've been asked to speak about reducing speeds to create a safer environment for walking and cycling, and I am going to focus on the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit experience in Warrington, although this is only perhaps one tool available in the toolkit. The aim of this presentation is to cover the history of how and why Warrington has introduced 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in the majority of residential roads, provide some background about our approach to the study of 20-mile speed limits prior to implementing borough-wide. I'll outline some of the results we obtained from the pilot studies, but also touch on the political influences and the decision-making processes, and explain how we approach delivering a significant tax within limited available budgets. In essence, I'll outline a timeline for the journey we've taken with 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, which the borough-wide rollout in Warrington started early in 2008. Some of the content in the presentation is now a little bit old, and there's been a great deal of debate around the 20-mile-an-hour agenda in recent years, and some shift in national opinion and also DFT guidance since we started. I've adapted much of this presentation from previous versions, so I apologise if some of the context reflects where Warrington was at that time. The benefits of reduced speed, well, I think they're well known. We have the potential of delivering significant benefits in encouraging alternative modes of travel by making it easier to decide to walk or cycle, improve the quality of life through promoting healthier lifestyles, and possibly environmental benefits such as reductions in emissions and also reducing the frequency and severity of collisions and casualties. If 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are successful, they would make a significant contribution to our local transport plan objectives. I purposely mentioned the road safety benefits last on this because in Warrington we tried hard for the project not to be seen purely as a road safety measure, and it was very difficult to keep road safety off the agenda as we went through this. So historically, I think Warrington is no different from most of the local authorities in that we introduced 20-mile-an-hour zones with traffic calming for a road safety improvement or perhaps to manage the impact of traffic flow on inappropriate roads. Also, prior to 2005, we did introduce short sections of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits around school frontages, although they actually failed to reduce average speeds, and it was a project that we didn't complete for all schools. So why did we pilot? We chose to pilot 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in larger areas. At that time, there'd been a relaxation in the DFT guidance on the use of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. Also, in the background, Portsmouth had decided to implement a citywide 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in residential areas. And that gave local-based pressure groups 20's Plenty in the Warrington Cycle campaign stronger arguments for encouraging Warrington Council to follow suit. There was limited tangible evidence nationally about the potential benefits, and the cost of implementing 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in a blanket approach similar to Portsmouth was estimated around £740,000. So it would have been quite a leap of faith for Warrington to commit to the project without supporting data, and it may have actually been quite difficult to withstand the likely challenges in the democratic process of making the traffic orders. We also had a problem of targeting vulnerable road user casualties, as they were generally very sporadic in Warrington. So we were looking for something else to try and aid the road safety improvement agenda. We were keen to understand that the potential benefits of introducing 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in the majority of our residential roads could be achieved in Warrington. So we visited Portsmouth in May 2008, and the conclusions we got from that was that Warrington was very different in geography and road network, less of a grid layout and more of a new town build. Possibly very different in culture as well. Warrington seems to be very extremely dependent on the car. Public expectation in Warrington was not for us to deliver reduced speed limits, but for physical measures through traffic calming. We felt that the Portsmouth experience could not be related to Warrington, so therefore we felt we had to try and find out for ourselves. In 2008, October 2008, the Warrington Borough Council committed to undertaking a pilot study to determine whether the benefits associated with average speed reductions could be delivered and, most importantly, sustained. The concept of our pilots was to provide the council with a mechanism for understanding the value of potentially implementing 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in the majority of residential streets in Warrington without the usually associated traffic calming and, importantly, without increasing the enforcement demand on Cheshire Constabulary. So I'll just cover a bit of background on the trials that we undertook. We identified 3 areas and they were launched in February 2009, and they ran for an 18-month period covered by experimental traffic regulation orders. And the 3 areas were very different in nature, and they were selected on that to have comparable data. We had the town centre having a history of vulnerable road user casualties, although a significant proportion of them were actually associated with the nighttime economy. Orford area, it's a very large residential area with some traffic calming measures already in there, but within the Orford area we also included a boundary road which is a primary route. Now we have a Park Road which, having relatively few injury collisions, although they were unusually high proportion, involve serious injuries to pedal cyclists. Now that was intended to be a single road study. Now it's worth noting that I think we all know the DFT suggested that 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are only suitable where vehicle speeds are already low, you know, with a mean speed of around 24 miles per hour or below. But we included several of these roads within the pilot where the average speeds were above the 24-mile-an-hour threshold. Just to give you some illustration of what the areas look like, that's the town centre. And I'd say this was also promoted to contribute to the agenda of encouraging more sustainable commuting practice in terms of walking and cycling. The red lines on there are actually the monitoring stations, although I do apologise, not all of them are visible. The Orford area is the very large residential area with some elements of traffic calming through there, and just to the bottom of the slide there you can see the A50 long lane. And this is the Park Road area. Park Road is the blue line going through the middle of that area, which was intended to be a single carriageway study as a potential comparator against the data collected from the other 2 area-based studies. But after launching, complaints were received about rat running to avoid the speed limit. Residents couldn't really understand why we made Park Road 20 mile an hour and not the more residential roads that it served. It became very politically sensitive. We ended up extending the 20 mile an hour speed limits into the areas in red. Unfortunately, it became an area of 20 mile an hour, and although we could only monitor the impact on the 2 locations on Park Road where the red lines are, because we had no before data from any other part of the area. So in terms of data capture, what we set out to measure, collision and casualty data, it is perhaps the most tangible data that we have accessible to us. Traffic speed and flow, level of cycle usage, effects on vehicle emissions, public perception of 20 mile an hour speed limits. We were actually unable to measure the emissions as the results were likely to be inconclusive due to variance in air quality which we couldn't control or measure. The traffic surveys, there was a framework to this. We established the monitoring framework of how we intended to study the impact of the speed limits. Now, what we wanted to determine was whether any speed reductions were delivered by the reduced speed limits, if reductions were achieved only as a result of enforcement activity, and whether the reduced speed limits could be maintained through the whole period of the pilot. And the pilot ended in August 2010. We also undertook public perception surveys, and we were trying to measure any changes in the perception of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits through the pilots. The base data was collated in February 2009, and that was immediately prior to publicity and launch. Then, at the same time, at stage 3 in the traffic surveys, and that was when we had increased engagement events and police presence on the roads, and also at the trial, at the end of the trial in August 2010. During the trial, it was obviously equally important to raise public awareness of the new 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and to maximise the potential for behavioural change. So the engagement we had involved the public perception surveys, newspaper adverts, distribution of information leaflets, various consultation events in the communities within the pilots, and the development of a website information page, and also the creation of a web forum to facilitate the debate. If the speed limit changes did in fact influence a change in behaviour, a key factor for us was to have an indication of whether the changes were likely to be sustainable. So, after all the surveys had been undertaken at stage 3 in November 2009, the pilots received very little attention, no enforcement, no engagement activity, and no community-based events. And that was to see if the speed limits would fall into disrepute at the last stage of the monitoring. Just quickly skip through some of the results. The average traffic flow across the monitoring stations reduced by 11%. There was a lot of variations in flows between the monitoring periods, and particularly in Park Road, which supported the community view that the traffic had been running to avoid the speed limit. There was also influence in the town centre where the flows were adversely affected due to temporary traffic management towards the end of the pilot, which has affected all of the results. In terms of speed reduction, overall average speed reduction was 1.45 mile per hour. Now the greatest reductions in speed were experienced on the A50 Long Lane and Park Road. Now these were the primary routes and the distributor roads. On Long Lane we saw a reduction in 2.3 miles per hour, and on Park Road 2.7 miles per hour. However, the readings were all still above the 24 mile per hour threshold at 25.5 mile per hour for Long Lane and 26.3 mile per hour for Park Road. And that could generate an enforcement problem for the police if those were made permanently 20 mile an hour. It's worth noting that even during the period of police attention at stage 3 of monitoring, the average speed stayed marginally above the 20 mile an hour. Just to illustrate some of those readings of average speeds during each stage of monitoring, this is the town centre. You'd note the lowest reading during stage 3, which is when we had the engagement and enforcement activity. And in the Orford area, the distribution is similar. And again, in Park Road, all showed the lowest reading at stage 3. In terms of road traffic collisions and casualties, during the pilot period, the 18-month pilot period, we actually saw a roughly 12% reduction in collisions and 8% reduction in casualties across the whole authority area. So we factored this trend out of the data from the pilot areas, and we found that we'd experienced a further 25% reduction in collisions, although the casualties had increased. In terms of the results from the perception surveys, this is just some of the examples of the feedback we had. 77% of the respondents wanted to see 20 mile an hour speed limits become permanent in their area. 73% they would not be encouraged to walk or cycle any more than they had done if 20 mile an hour speed limits became permanent. However, the survey indicated that the percentage of respondents that were cyclists had increased steadily throughout the pilot study, rising from 30% to 40%. The respondents were split approximately 50-50 on whether there would be a positive effect on driver behaviour if all residential roads in Warrington became 20. And 41% felt that there hadn't been a reduction in speed as a result of the pilots. But what we thought was significant, that during the pilot, 86% of the respondents had changed their views. Overall, there was positive support for 20 mile an hour speed limits, and that continued through the 3 survey stages. although the perception had changed significantly in that people in the final stage of the survey stated that they felt that additional measures such as traffic calming or police enforcement would be required to maintain the benefits. Just touching on the driver engagement days, and they were run in each of the 3 areas prior to the increased police presence. I'll use the town centre as an example of what we captured. It was run in conjunction with the 3rd stage of monitoring and the enforcement activity that followed. And this was done through the Warrington Road Safety Partnership, and we had police, road safety officers and fire service involved in stopping drivers and offering them education and the opportunity to complete a questionnaire. If they refused, they would receive a fixed penalty notice. In terms of the data that was collected, 57 drivers were stopped over a 2-hour period from 11 AM to 1 PM. 30 males were stopped and 27 females. 61% of the drivers admitted to using the road on a regular basis and that they knew the speed limit had been lowered. 65% of the drivers lived in Warrington, and most of them were travelling to work or going shopping. And the comments ranged from ridiculous to brilliant idea. So some of our experience from the pilots, we had no prior consultation other than an all-member briefing in October before launch. Publicity of the launch was only a couple of weeks before all the signs were revealed. It generated a significant public debate and media coverage, which was actually quite effective in raising public awareness. The single road treatment of Park Road was not well received or understood by residents living in the surrounding area. It was actually difficult for the politicians. The members were sold on the concept, although the negativity seemed to get them a little bit nervous about the potential for losing votes. On completion of the pilot in August 2010, that resulted in the speed limits reverting back to 30 miles an hour and the signage being greyed out while the analysis and the council decision process took place, and this was very confusing to motorists. So in terms of some of the conclusions, what was our relevant learning? Did the pilots effectively model a borough-wide use of 20 mile an hour speed limits? Probably not, although we believe that they were robust for the resources that we could invest. Was the method of modelling statistically reliable? Possibly not. We didn't have any suitable control sites. Were the perception surveys and engagement results reliable? Possibly not, as the profile of the respondents was not reflective of the population. Reductions in average vehicle speed and significant reductions in collisions that appeared to be related. Similar to the Portsmouth experience, the greatest reductions in vehicle speed that we experienced were measured on the roads where the before speed was higher than 24 mile an hour. Was I surprised by the results? I have to say I was. The positive results were reported to our executive board in October 2010, and council agreed in principle to roll out 20 mile an hour speed limits for residential areas. This was only the start of the decision process, as we still didn't know how we were going to make it happen. A road hierarchy and framework for delivery was developed through a council scrutiny process, and that involved a series of all-member briefings and stakeholder engagement events. And the outcome of that was this road hierarchy, if you like, for what we deemed would be appropriate for making 20 mile an hour speed limits. And it's a residential road, and this was in line with the speed limit review criteria being a minimum of 21 dwellings, but we did give additional consideration to schools, shops and other pedestrian attractions and amenities. And it shouldn't be a key link road, not a distributor or a key connective road function, not a primary emergency service route, and not a primary bus route, and that is any route that had 4 or more buses per hour. Now this is an indication of the timeframes for the political process. From reporting the pilot results in October 2010, it wasn't actually until February 2012 that the council approved officers to proceed with the borough-wide implementation. 20 mile an hour speed limits was a key decision for the council, perhaps due to the recognition that 20 mile an hour speed limits could have a significant impact in the political domain. So we still had challenges to delivery. When we were making the pilot areas permanent, we did actually receive a statistical challenge to the theory, our whole theory behind why we should be promoting 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. The budget allocations were expected to be in the region of £70,000 a year, and on that basis it was going to take us 10 years to complete. The key concept of our 20-mile-an-hour was not to see it as an enforceable speed limit that would be a deterrent and reduce vehicle speeds and then potentially deliver benefits. What we were after was being able to encourage a cultural change by identifying to motorists that Warrington's residential roads are different in nature and should be used differently. With more motorists residing in a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, we hoped to encourage greater respect of the speed limits on their travels. So on that basis, a lengthy delivery time would reduce the potential impact. This is an illustration really of the extent, the coverage of what were proposed new 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. The areas not in blue are generally either non-residential or already 20-mile-an-hour. This was clearly going to be a significant task to resource, both in terms of funding and also with staff resource. In May 2012, the Council was fortunately awarded £4.6 million from the government's local Sustainable Transport Fund. Now, the purpose of the LSTF funding was to support the local economy through promoting greater use of sustainable and low carbon transport. And key features of the Warrington project were improvements and additions to the east to west cycle network, speed reduction measures in residential areas to create a safer environment for walking and cycling, and also personalised travel planning with over 12,000 households in the north of the town. Reductions in average speed would also support the LSTF personal travel plan. As I suggested earlier, 20 mile an hour could be the catalyst to people making smarter choices about their travel options through the reduction in fear of traffic speed. What LSTF gave us was, in essence, a big boost in funding. At this stage, the 20 mile an hour project also had all party political support, which raised the corporate priority of accelerating the programme. Local transport plan priorities and budget allocations were adjusted to support the LSTF agenda, which brought greater integrity to the programme by accelerating delivery. With the LSTF support of around 150,000 and considering the LTP priorities, we were able to be confident about reducing the 10-year programme to 3 years. Now this illustrates the east to west cycling corridor to assist with cycling access to employment of the Birchwood business areas, which is up in the northeast, and the Amiga site, which is being developed in the northwest. The red areas are the 20 mile an hour speed limits promoted through the LSTF support. We developed a prioritisation system for how we were going to roll out the 20 mile an hour speed limits, and in that we were considering geography. By developing a central core of 20 mile an hour and joining up the existing areas, but also considering population density, increasing the exposure to as many people as early in the project as possible, and also the road safety benefits by targeting the areas greatest number of vulnerable road user collisions. As the programme had actually been accelerated, the prioritisation methods were not really noticeable, although we did receive some inquiries from the outer lying areas which were targeted later on in the 3-year programme. Well, LSTF also gave us the opportunity to refresh the marketing plan. And most noticeable in this is the activity with local Wire FM sponsorship of the home run, and the development of an infomercial which was displayed in Warrington's Golden Square shopping centre as part of a community event. And if I can manage my technical aspects of this, I'll hopefully be able to show you that. And for those of you who noticed, I do apologise for that scene at the end where the gentleman stepped onto the bus before the old lady with the shopping. It wasn't in the script, and it was something we didn't get editorial rights before it was finalised. In terms of delivery methods, we batched our traffic regulation orders into 10 individual batches. And there was the reason for that was should we receive objections to individual orders, we would still be able to progress with progression of delivering the project whilst the objections were dealt with through a regulatory traffic committee process. And the project has resulted in 510 kilometres of new 20-mile-an-hour speed limits being introduced, and that involved just under 3,000 new speed limit signs. The scheme delivery has actually been completed 12 months ahead of schedule and has cost within the region of 580,000, which is 160,000 under budget estimates. Although we had that challenge to our theory when we were making the pilot areas permanent, it's worth noting that actually no objections were received to any of the traffic regulation orders when we were implementing borough-wide rollout. And as a result of the project, Warrington's been recognised regionally and nationally by the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation and also the Highways magazine. There are quite a lot of detailed information that we have on our pilot studies, although I appreciate it's now getting a bit old, but if anybody wanted to have access to that, I'll be happy to try and facilitate that if you wanted to get in touch with me. Cheers, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Mark. I think that's a real in-depth kind of view, really, of how you went about. And I think the main thing there, and which won't surprise a lot of our local authority listeners, is the time frame it took from kind of 2008 all the way through now to 2015, really, or that long time that it took you. So, I mean, here at Break, obviously, you mentioned there about 20's plenty for us, and Rod King, that I know you've worked with, and I know Anna, I think, on this webinar as well. And through Break, we know now that more than 14 million people live in areas which are adapting or have adopted 20-mile-an-hour limits, and unfortunately, more than half of road deaths and serious injuries occur on roads with 30 mile an hour. So, you know, things like that you're achieving there in Warrington are a real step in the right direction, and it's you know, it's brilliant to see the efforts that you've had to go to and the funding that you've got. If anyone does have any questions for Mark, then please feel free to type them into the question panel, or we can come back to them at the end when we hand over to our next presenter. So thanks very much, Mark, for your time on that. I think that's real good, clear view of kind of the hurdles you had to go in, and I think there, like you said, the time frame it would have taken you if that funding didn't suddenly come into place, and you were able to kind of achieve what you did over those 3 years, thanks to that funding. And obviously it's good to know for other local authorities that there are areas of funding out there, and as you mentioned there, stepping away from 20 mile an hour as being seen as a road safety measure, but actually being seen as a cultural and behavioural change to increase and promote cycling and walking, and have these health benefits and everything else on top of it. So it's not just a road safety issue, there's the health benefits on top of that. So thank you very much. We will now hand over to our next presenter, Ginny Leonard from City Connect.
Hi everybody. I'll just get this started.
So yeah, so we just hand over.
Oh,
yeah, sorry, go on. Once you get your presentation up, I was just I think it kind of works nicely that we've obviously had kind of Matt giving an overview of the travel strategy, and Mark there talking about 20 mile an hour limits. But I know Matt at the beginning did touch on the kind of separated travel lanes and etc. for cyclists and walking, so hopefully Ginny will be able to give more of an idea of what they've gone. We can't see a presentation at the moment, Ginny. Have you managed to? There we go. Brilliant.
Can you see it now?
Yep, no worries. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. So hi everybody, my name's Ginny. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager for a project called City Connect, which is an infrastructure project in West Yorkshire. We're based in Leeds. I work for the Combined Authority, working in partnership with Leeds City Council and Bradford Council. So I'm going to give you a bit of background, if I can get my presentation to work, which I can't at the moment. So I'll just give you a bit of background and content. We're going to go through what contributed us to getting this project off the ground. I'll tell you about the project and the elements, some do's and don'ts, our successes, what's actually happening on the ground now, and what we're planning to do next. So this all kind of began when we got the news that that we were going to be having the Grande Park was in Yorkshire and was going to be actually in Leeds, and with it 2.5 million people would be coming to our region, all with an interest in cycling, and there was definitely political will to improve our cycle infrastructure from that point. Just after that, the Department for Transport announced that the Cycle City Ambition funding grant was open, and we had approximately 6 weeks to put together a very ambitious bid to start improving our infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians. We found out that our bid was successful, and we were awarded £29.1 million. That was made up of £18 million from the Department for Transport and a further £11 million with local match funding from the local transport plan and other local pots of funding. So the bid is made up of these elements. The main part of the project is a cycle superhighway, which is 23 kilometres of segregated cycle superhighway, starting in the centre of Bradford, coming all the way along to Leeds and then out to East Leeds along one of the main arteries. We're also complementing the cycle superhighway with a series of 20-mile-an-hour zones that surround the route to promote safe access and exit from the route. We're also resurfacing 6 miles of canal towpath from Kirkstall out to Shipley. It's one of the busiest towpaths in the country, and we've actually just won an award with Sustrans for that stretch of towpath last week. We're also redesigning Leeds City Centre Loop for future development. So we've got a core network of cycle routes coming in and out of the city centre already, but this needs to be more connected. And with the cycle superhighway running straight through the centre of Leeds, it was necessary to come up with a plan to redesign that. We've also put in 240 new Sheffield stands in advance of the Grande Park coming to Leeds, and they are very well used, and in fact we're looking to put some more in. We're also converting an old nightclub into a cycle hub, not just for cycle parking but for community engagement. So there'll be workshop space, meeting space, Wi-Fi, cafe, as well as the cycle parking. We're doing that in partnership with Leeds, and we'll be putting an expression of interest out for people to come and help us run that in the very near future. We also put in 16 car bike ports that effectively take out a car parking space in Leeds city centre and make room for and allow room for 12 bikes to be parked there. They are fixed pieces of street furniture, but we've been monitoring those very carefully to make sure that they're in the best place to be best utilised, and we move them as and when we find that demand is increasing or decreasing in specific areas. We also have a dedicated project for communication engagement, and that includes all the consultation. Now I'm just going to swap screens here just to show you a bit about our website and how we've used it, and I'm going to actually show a video. So the consultation was done face-to-face with over 100 events along the route. We've spoken to over 13,000 people in the last year. We made all our documentation available online so people could actually have a look at the documentation and feedback on it. They could do a survey, or they could click on a map here and make a comment. and we can feedback that way. So that was a successful way of doing it. We also made a video, which, oh, hang on, can't hear the sound. I'll put the sound on for you. I don't know if you'll be able to hear the sound, but we had a video made by our branding partners, who are DIVA, who are specialised in behaviour change and transportation marketing. So they came up with this idea for us, which gives us a bit of a an overview of the project plan. In addition to, I'll just stop that. You don't need to go through it all. In addition to the funding that we got from Department for Transport, I've just frozen my screen now, haven't I? From the Department for Transport, we also received a pot of funding from the Department of Health for to implement a walk-in project alongside this. So we had specific money to improve areas along the route by doing street audits, working with local community groups to deliver a programme of walking activities with specific demographic groups. With the latest stats that were published last week indicated that nationally there's been an increase in the amount of walking or people choosing to walk as a mode of transport, but actually that Leeds was leading in that increase as well. So the focused campaigns for improving in walking are definitely working, and we intend to continue that down that focused targeted campaign route with cycling as well. So this is the route. It starts in the centre of Bradford, comes along some of the poorest areas in the country, not just in the county. It's a main artery in and out of the two cities. It goes along some dual carriageway fast parts of the commute in and out of the two cities, and there's not an awful lot of cycling happening on that route, but we know that the demand is there because of the centres that it connects, and because of the areas of employment along the route. So it connects lots of smaller town centres. There are 48 schools along the route. We're working very closely with them to get more children cycling as well. It's not just building the infrastructure. The aim was not to get people to ride the full route from Leeds to Bradford, but to choose to walk or cycle as a natural choice for the shorter journeys for less than 5 miles. So these are our objectives, and it's been pointed out already in some of the previous presentations that the cost of inactivity in the UK is now at extreme levels, and really choosing to walk and cycle more is one of the kind of quick wins. It's not been that way because the provision of infrastructure is such that people just don't feel safe to do so. Leeds is still called the motorway city of the 70s, and our mode share of daily commutes, the cycling mode share of daily commutes, is less than 2%. It's just not a friendly place to cycle or walk. So increasing cycling and walking so that it becomes part of a resident's healthy living plan was the kind of biggest objective of this route. It's not about just laying a piece of tarmac. It's actually converting that behaviour, that thought process from it being a natural choice to get in a car and nip to the shops or nip round the corner to see friends or family, but actually to kind of change your behaviour and start hopping on a bike or walking for those shorter journeys. At the minute we've got approximately 900 cyclists using the route. Obviously it's not built, but using this route at some point along the route, approximately 900 cyclists a day, and the target increase will see approximately 9,000 cyclists a day on the route when it's built. So these are a few things that we think that you must do if you're going to deliver a project and start achieving major mode share behaviour change. So do set aside sufficient funding for engagement. If you build it, they will come is only half of the story. We've got quite a substantial budget for engagement activities. We've got 10 work streams across the next 2 years to actually get more people cycling. That's working with workplaces, schools, working on with our public health teams to deliver Cycle for Health programs, working with existing cycle groups to improve what they can offer and support what they can deliver, working with the Big Bike Revival, that sort of thing. We also think you should get your partners around the table really early. We had a very short space of time to turn this bid around, and it was quite a significant amount of money with a very ambitious project to be delivered, and we knew that we needed a lot of input to get it right and make sure that it was effective. So from the very outset, we worked with the national cycling organisations, TTC, Sustrans. We also worked with Living Streets. We had public health teams around the table, transport from local authorities, working with Leeds and Bradford and the combined authority. So they were part of the bid writing team. So we had a very clear strategy of what we wanted to achieve and how we were going to achieve that, and we had the buy-in from all those organisations right from the beginning. I'd agree with what Mark was saying from Sustrans, that you need a really clear and concise plan that fits into a long-term strategy, and we were a bit slow off the mark in having a long-term strategy, but our short-term strategy was very clear, and from the back of this bid we've now got a long-term strategy. That means that as and when DFT will more than likely offer this type of funding again, that we'll have shovel-ready schemes that are ready to go, and I think that's what we need to be aware of, is that it put the short timescales put a lot of people off going for this pot of funding, and having your plans in place in advance is the right way to go about it. Work closely with your local campaign groups. They're often the experts. They've been campaigning for change for cyclists and pedestrians for a long time, and we've got them sitting around the table as part of our stakeholder group and advisory group right from the outset. And they're quick to tell us when we're doing things wrong, but we need that as well, because we need the support from them to point out when we might not be getting things quite right. These engineers, the UTC guys, have not done anything of this scale before, so we rely on them 100% to make sure that between us we're getting it right. Don't expect to be able to please everyone all of the time, because you can't. Even there's some bits of the planning stages that we've gone through with even the cyclists complaining and what we're doing, and those bits, the difficult challenges of designing a 23-kilometre cycle superhighway are frequent, but with accepting that it's a long-term picture, looking at the bigger picture. We might not get it perfect this time, but it's the first step towards that longer-term change. Do consult a lot. We've approached the consultation period quite differently, I think, to a lot of organisations, and been upfront, honest, empathetic. We've had a team of permanent consultation team on standby for 6 months for the first 6 months of the project, to actually go out and deliver events. As I say, we spoke to over 13,000 people with 84% support for the project, which we didn't expect. We thought it was going to be a lot more difficult to get buy-in for the project, because we are actually taking vehicle capacity and taking car parking spaces from a very busy route. So the opportunity for people to comment on the plans, and then we were very clear that we'd made changes as and when we could, and fed that back to the consultees, and that seemed to be because they actually believed that they were being listened to. Continue to engage during the build process. I think we didn't factor in how upsetting it's going to be for how disruptive the roadworks are when building this length, and it wasn't a case of just relying on the contractors to be able to go out and do that. We had to actually keep speaking to people and reassure them that it was short-term disruption for long-term gain. Do get your ward members on side and keep them informed. We went to every effort to make sure that any time we were putting out a public consultation, public communication to any of their ward members, that they received that communication first, so that they were prepared to answer questions at their surgeries and things. And do get a brand that's recognisable. Actually, the City Connect brand is the branding for new infrastructure change across West Yorkshire now, and it's we've got that brand recognition, and we've been able to take a lot of people with us because they instantly know what City Connect is and understand it. Do try and get a high-profile champion for the cause. We've got one of our councillors, Councillor Roger Harrington, is a long-term cycle enthusiastic, and he's been really great in fighting for political will, for political buy-in, and we've had a mouthpiece that in a lot of places that we wouldn't normally have had if we hadn't identified him early on as a champion. Some of the things you mustn't do: don't do what you've always done. These are actually some of the pictures from around Leeds and Bradford from the cycle infrastructure that is in place at the moment. And you know, we made a commitment very early on that we were going to keep going down this route, and to the point that we would actually go back and retrofit anything along this route that looked like this. Don't underestimate the power of social media. We had a incident a couple of weeks ago where one of the first junctions to be finished on the route, well, I say finished, it wasn't quite finished, but almost there, had been painted wrong, and it went wild on social media for a week, and we got an absolute battering. And I think, you know, we knew the power of social media, and we knew that we wanted to use it as a tool for engaging with people, but actually a lot of the noise on social media came from outside of West Yorkshire, and it was very difficult to combat that. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of it. Don't forget to communicate during the build. We work very closely with our contractors now, but as I was saying before, that it was quite difficult at the beginning because there were no lines of communication between actual people. The guys actually building it, we've got 10 gangs working at any one time, so the guys actually building it and us, those lines of communication were difficult. So making sure that there's an opportunity for them to speak to us, for the public to speak to us, and for us to then feed back to the general public what's going on. Don't forget to collect your baseline data before you build. We were talking at one of the CCAG meetings not long ago, and a couple of cities had left it too late to collect their baseline data, and things had already started changing, behaviour had already started changing. So the first thing that we did in West Yorkshire was survey 2,000 households on their current behaviours, and we'll be resurveying and resurveying again after that. Don't make major changes to the plans that you consulted on without telling your stakeholders. One of the other difficulties is that the plans are changed quite a lot in between the initial planning phase and the actual build because of what you find on the ground and what the contractors say that they can manage and what they can't. So we made changes and fed those back to our stakeholders, and that worked really well. But we know on other schemes that we've done when we haven't fed back and the plans have been different, it's caused quite a lot of problems. And don't assume that the contractors will understand the bigger cycling and walking picture. So we've had to go out and inspect what they've been building because some of it's just not logical for cyclists. So they know they're building a cycle route, but because nothing on this scale has been done outside of London, or really in the UK on this scale, we've had to communicate, you know, what we're actually trying to achieve. So we might have gone out and they've built perfect Type 2 cycle segregated highway, but there's put a new traffic signal right in the middle of it without really understanding why that can't work at that point. So our successes have been extensive consultation with 85% support, and I think a large part of that is down to our branding and the way that we've communicated. I've said right from the beginning that we might not know the answers, but would go away and find it and get back to people. And because it's been a two-way communication at all times, that's allowed us to get the strong support. And even where we haven't got support, it's been over very minor things, and we've been able to make those changes and actually bring people around. And we only had 2 major objections to the scheme, which have now been overcome. And we thought we built in risk elements of delay because we thought the TROs would cause all sorts of objections, and they haven't. Our ambitious design, as I say, this hasn't until the embankment scheme in London. This hasn't been done outside in the UK before. 23 kilometres is a fairly large scheme in anybody's books, and people are really impressed. We had Sustrans board come and do a field trip with us a few weeks ago, and we took them out in a minibus along the route, and they just said, wow, this is really ambitious. I can't believe that you're building something of this scale right in the middle of one of the busiest routes in and out of Leeds. So our ambitious design is very successful, and we anticipate that the levels of use will increase to such an extent that this will just the first in a stepping stone from it being a motorway city to it being a cycle-friendly city. We have some unique partnership working. We have an advisory group that's made up of a paid chairman, an independent chair, and he sits on the programme board as well. So our advisory group made up of the Leeds Cycle Campaign, Bradford Cycle Campaign, Sustrans, Living Streets, CTC, members of public health and transport, sitting around a table. They get together once every couple of months to go over plans and do act in an advisory capacity to the board. So that's quite unique. And our stakeholder group, there's over 300 people, named people on our stakeholder group, and we get participation of up to about 60 people on a bi-monthly basis to keep them up to date. A very low number of objections and high political support, and quite vocal political support for this as well. The other success is the new funding opportunity. So we secured the Department of Health funding. We've also got support with further LSTF funding for our walking project, and we've also secured another 30 million for the next tranche of City Connect to deliver more improvements. This is the build so far. So you can see we've got floating bus stops. Some of the challenges have been how, in a very small space, how we get the cycle path to be completely continuous along its length, including side road treatments and past floating bus stops. You'll see on the left-hand side, this is what we call Type 1 segregation, so it's back-to-back curbing. This is actually bi-directional, and then the Type 2 is a drop curb rather than the back-to-back curbing. So we're about 35% through the build, and the first sections will be open in October, and the final sections will be open late January for use. So where next? City Connect 2. We've got, as I say, a further £30 million worth of funding, and that's delivering 6 projects across West Yorkshire. Not just one single cycle superhighway, but we're going to look at the mini Holland type work that's been going on in London, and we're actually terming it neighbourhood improvements. So we'll be looking at smaller pieces of cycle infrastructure being improved, cycle and walking routes being improved to make connectivity. Improve our connectivity within urban areas, as well as improving canal towpaths is the big part of the project. So we're working with Canal and River Trust on that as well. There will be sustained funding through our single transport plan, and we're just going out to consultation on that. As it was mentioned before, the government have agreed the cycle and walking strategy will be published this year. So we've got buy-in to that. We committed to working with the DfT on that last year, and we're reviewing our cycle prospectus at the moment with our stakeholders to make sure that our long-term strategy is right, and we'll be looking to achieve further European funding streams. So that's what our next projects look like, and we'll be getting the overlay of our long-term strategy will fit on top of that map, with a lot more cycle superhighways planned over the next period of the single transport plan. That's it from me. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Ginny. I think that's it just shows the ambition that you've had there and what you've managed to achieve, really. And like you said originally, in such a short space of time. I think the main things that you cover, which have been covered by the other speakers as well, is that key word of partnership as well, really, working closely with other groups and obviously colleagues that we work closely with at Sustrans and Living Streets. It's brilliant, and I know we'll be in touch with you to hopefully support our Road Safety Week this year and put you on the spot for that. So it's great what you're doing there. And I think the other main part, as you've mentioned there, is funding really, and I think that might be something that local authorities and other groups might not be aware really of actually how much funding can be out there really. Obviously every local authority strapped for cash and trying to find different measures, and I think it was interesting there about not just funding through the DFT but also the Department for Health. So this whole notion, which I think has been echoed throughout the presentations, that not just a road safety measure but actually the benefit for health, and obviously the Department for Health recognising that, and obviously the European funding that's out there as well for various groups and kind of working together. I've got a quick question here from Matt, and I think you kind of covered it maybe with that last slide with some of the pictures, because you talked about the Leeds city centre loop. He's basically asking, will there be changes to the main city centre one-way system for general traffic as a result of CityConnect, or is it more about kind of retrofitting cycle routes onto it?
No, it's a lot. There's a long term. I say long term, but certainly within the next 3 years, that we're looking at putting a break in the loop so that so you won't be able to not the inner ring road, but there will. I don't know how well you know Leeds, but there is a route that comes right past the front of the station, and we're looking at closing that to cars, so that will be increased pedestrian cycle zone. So the long-term ambition is to stop vehicle movements within the city centre at the rate that they are at the moment anyway, because there is an alternative loop road around the outside. So the infrastructure within the city centre will change in the short term as a result of CityConnect, but in the long term because of that, yeah.
And I think it's great there. I mean, there's so many different aspects to what you're achieving actually that different people can take on board. So, okay, they might not be producing such a long super highway as that, but actually there's different aspects, as you mentioned there, canal, towpaths, areas that are already pedestrianised or cycle friendly, but also actually into city centres, into other areas which obviously many local authorities cover. So if anybody does have any questions, we've got another. I appreciate we've run over slightly, and thank you very much for everybody for hanging on. If you do have any questions at all, then do please feel free to put them to any of our speakers. If not, then like I said, we will be able to put these to to our speakers afterwards. So we've got a couple of questions coming in, so they might relate to kind of all speakers really. I mean, David Joyner did pose a question earlier, mainly for Matt Davis, so I'll go back to Matt, but Ginny, whilst you're still there really. He's saying about kind of, he says, what would you say are the key elements to advocate the joining of active travel and road safety? In many councils, these are separate teams, and the focus is very much on tackling the rise in KSIs rather than overall public health. So I guess through the work that you've had to do, and obviously it's been a lot of partnership work, Ginny, that you've had to do. Have you found that difficult, kind of, especially even within one local authority? You do have different teams, don't you, who one's tackling kind of trying to get down figures of killed and seriously injured, whereas others are more trying to engage people in more cycling. Did you find kind of any difficulties with that, or did you find actually that there were several people that kind of could link those together?
No, I think there's a number of successes within the partnerships that we've got, and that was that the public health teams were moving from public health into the local authority at the time that we were putting this bid together. So it was an opportune moment to get them involved, really. Also because we've got the political buy-in, and that's kind of disseminated down to the senior officers at the local authority in public highways. Which has meant that they've been able to get their road safety teams and their highways teams involved. So we've been able to make those partnerships quite easily, but I think also because we've got a substantial amount of our budget set aside for engagement, and that we are delivering a specifically focused campaign of engagement across 10 different work streams, we can work individually with those partner representatives as well to hit their targets. So we'll be working with road safety teams, we'll be working with public health teams as well. So I think, you know, it's really important to encourage that level of partnership working. We would have been kind of reinventing the wheel, I guess, if we'd have continued down the route without those partners. So yeah, getting them around the table is really important.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And with regards to, I know the emphasis wasn't on kind of casualty figures. Was that something that you were kind of made aware of? I know that wasn't the kind of main remit, but was that something that you know that was aware to try and bring down this figure of obviously you know, people being killed and seriously injured on our roads? You know, try and reduce this casualty figure, or was it more the health?
It's more a byproduct, if you know what I mean. I mean, that is obviously one of the outcomes of the scheme, but we didn't want to focus on the negative. So by focusing on the positive and what we can achieve, those stats will improve naturally.
No, that's great. George Bagley's put a couple of questions here, but they might be more relevant to Matt as well. Basically saying, I believe he might be with the fire service, saying basically in regards to casualty figures, how could the fire service assist in addressing these? So he's just wondering, you know, how, I guess it'd be more with a kind of active travel strategy, and I can put that to Matt. But you talked about your partnerships. Have you had any kind of the emergency services on board with the work that you're doing?
Is that directed to Matt or
Ginny,
me?
sorry. Yeah, sorry to you,
Yeah,
Ginny.
no, that's okay. No, that's okay. Yeah, we work with the emergency services because they're in West Yorkshire. They do quite a lot of delivery of bikeability for us, because they have a program of going out and delivering to schools. So it was a natural, they're a natural tool for us to use really, because they've already got that audience and that awareness. So yeah, we do work with the fire service.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll just quickly put a question to Matt. Are you still there, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So George has also said, do you have kind of any plans for the Scottish daylight hours resulting in kids travelling to school in the dark? You know, was that something that was looked at all in any of the kind of strategies or highlighted by any of the councils and partnerships you work with?
I don't recall anything specific about daylight hours and KSI analysis, no. So sorry, I can't help with that. Do you want me to comment on some of the other questions as well?
Yes. Well, I think I think that's fine really. Oh, the other question, so yeah, from David Joyner, basically, he said, yeah, what would you say are the key elements to advocate the joining of active travel and road safety? So he said in many councils these are separate teams and the focus is very much on tackling the rising KSIs rather than overall public health. So yeah, I think that would be more aimed at yourself as well.
Yeah, so certainly my experience at Edinburgh Council and a few others is the important thing is to have some kind of joint steering group that steers the plan that's created, and that would have someone on road safety, but also from other parts of the council, transport and planning as well, and to try and see what synergies there are between what people are doing. I mean, Edinburgh found that road safety were primarily involved in putting in new crossings, things like puffin crossings and double D islands, and they had a program for doing that on request. So it was about joining that work with any of the cycling and walking schemes that were happening elsewhere. When it comes to casualties, particularly Edinburgh have taken the approach that they want to reduce the casualty rate for walking and cycling rather than the raw figures. And what that means is relating it to some kind of measure of usage. So I think what they're aiming for there is to show that over time journeys by walking and cycling are becoming safer. Because what they've tended to see, certainly over the last 30 years, is the cycling, the levels of cycling have gone up from maybe about 1% of journeys to work to 5 or so, and the casualty numbers have remained static. So what we're taking from this is that what's happened is it's become safer for any given individual to make a journey by bike now compared to 30 years ago. So I think that's the approach that they've taken to looking at casualties, if that helps.
No, that's brilliant, and thank you very much, really, and thank you very much to all our speakers for their time today, and for everybody who's attended and stayed on right until the end. Like I say, apologies for kind of running over slightly, but I think you all agree it was well worth listening to all of those presentations, which were very in depth and lots of useful information, hopefully, to take on board and use for yourself. As I said, this webinar has been recorded, and I will send a link this afternoon to this, and also all of the presentations. So anything that you want to recap, also the opportunity to ask any questions as well. As I mentioned before, we do have 3 more webinars coming up. Partnership work has been a key word kind of promoted through this webinar, but we do have a specific webinar in September where we'll be looking at organisations and how they've worked with local businesses to get them on board with sustainable travel. So not only just through active travel to work schemes, which we'll be promoting and using during Road Safety Week, but also kind of engaging local businesses throughout campaign work, really, and also getting them on board from the start, and also looking, I guess, at funding opportunities with those. And then we've got 2 more webinars into 2016, which we will let you all know about nearer the time. One looking more at publicity campaigns, and the campaign where all 3 of our speakers have done has been key, really, in promoting that to the audience. And then finally in March, really engaging young people with safe and sustainable travel, as Gary mentioned earlier. A key part of this is our future generations, and making sure that we have safe and sustainable travel options for young people, and getting them on board from the start, as has been mentioned by all of our speakers, and ways that you can actually engage with young people through schools, community groups, etc., and get them on board from the start. So actually walking and cycling is seen as the norm and an everyday activity, but obviously there's a great deal of work that we all need to do to make sure that that is safe and an option for them. So thank you very much for everybody for attending today. As I say, I will email you all this afternoon with presentations, and any further questions that you have for any of our speakers or for break, then please do let us know. But thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you at one of our future events. Many thanks.